And if you say that, then you're a weak white man.
Whoa, you are. Wait.
I have no jurisdiction.
What the hell just happened?
I have no jurisdiction.
Wait, what just
I don't
happened?
even know if I'm insulted.
What
I
just
got
happened?
called a weak white man. Is that
You
an
are.
insult?
You're just a weak man. If you're afraid of the word,
I'm a strong white man. Look at me.
yeah.
Do I look weak to you? Am I weak? I might be weak.
In the
I
commercial
beat Brock
break,
Hewitt in bowling
in the
last
commercial
night,
break, we're going to have the best 3 out of 5 arm wrestling contest. That will be a web exclusive on the Denver Post.
I'm going to call my wife. She's going to be very disappointed.
It is going to be.
Honey.
She knew she married a white man.
Honey.
She did not know she married
But
a
he's
weak
a
white
weak
man.
white man, Danny. And you know what? I feel better.
I
that
do
we're-
not have white guilt because I know I treat people equally.
All right.
And so if you have guilt, that's your problem. It's not my problem.
I don't
and
have
if you
guilt,
have
man.
guilt and you say I have no jurisdiction about what's right and wrong, if
That's not what I said.
And you cannot use a word as a weapon and on one side and not on the other. It's just the way it is.
Hey, I'm Danny O'Neill, and I write a newsletter called The Dang Apostrophe. It also has an attached podcast and, well, a YouTube channel. Earlier this week in my newsletter, we looked at a column written by Mark Kiszla of the Denver Post regarding Russell Wilson and how the column itself really kind of symbolizes a venting that gets mistaken for being tough journalism. But I also had a previous encounter with Mark Kiszla, and after going through his column, I decided to go back and dig up an interview that I conducted. I was a guest on a show he was a host on in the week leading up to the Super Bowl matchup between the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos. And kind of listened to it. I had not listened to the whole thing in the 9 years since it happened. So listened to it and decided I would post that portion of the podcast here on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested, I encourage you to go ahead and take a look at the newsletter. A link to it is included in the comments, and I'll continue to populate and update this channel as well as the podcast that's attached to that newsletter. The host of this show was Peter Burns, who I believe now kind of works primarily in SEC territory. I saw him on TV a few weeks ago. He and I think it was Ben Watson had kind of played a prank where Watson stormed off a set or looked like he'd gotten mad at Peter Burns. Peter was someone I've gotten along with. I haven't stayed in touch with him. Also, Oren Lomina, who was also part of the show. And Oren is someone who I know has done a lot of work involving music as well. And then there was Mark Kiszla, who is the Denver columnist, works at the Denver Post and has for quite a long time. They had invited me on, and I can't remember if I had said something about Kiszla's column, because Kiszla wrote this column which basically said that Richard Sherman's a fake tough guy. It criticized Sherman for being all bark and no bite. I think he interviewed Warren Sapp about how Kiszla did, about how Sherman wasn't really tough. And it's set up to be sort of Denver and Seattle kind of going back and forth between each other. I'm representing Seattle. Kiszla's representing Denver. The first voice you'll hear is Peter Burns to kind of set this up.
Danny O'Neill going to join us here from Seattle, and we're going to
Are we gonna get him and Kiz together on some kumbaya
Well,
moments?
here's what I'm doing. I'm sitting in between Seattle and Denver riders. I just want to make sure everything is nice. By the way, we are heavily insured here on the program, so if anything breaks out, we'll be in good shape.
Well, we'll just type at each other, I think. Is that how you would have like a tough guy instead of like a standoff or like beat it, where they tie the two hands together?
Right,
It would be
just do
typing
it.
at each other.
It'll be great.
You can both have pens in your hands and then tie your other hands together.
I will assault him with similes.
That's nice.
So Danny, I was up here with Kiz yesterday at the media party, and all of a sudden his phone just starts blowing up on Twitter mentions. I'm like, what in the world is going on? Then I read the column today. Thoughts from the Seattle standpoint of my fine man Kiz's work here. Look, he's hydrating to get ready for this.
Well, you got to be well prepared, well fortified if you're going to take on Sherman in a war of words. Well, fake tough guy?
He is a fake tough guy. Marshawn Lynch is a real tough guy. He walks the walk. Sherman's out there just to get knuckleheads like me and you to pay attention to him. He's there for the money. He's not there to try to intimidate anybody. Marshawn Lynch doesn't care what I think about you. You cannot try to be a tough guy and then turn around and say, I want everybody to like me. Play it one way or the other.
I think he's right about that. The part that is wrong is, and I don't think Sherman cared about people not liking him. I don't know if I'll get into that in my response, but like my reaction is that I don't know if Sherman's motivation was entirely financial. Like, I think there was some of it. Like, he knew that he was going to make himself prominent by taking that approach, and I think he's always had a very firm sense of what he's capable of being outside of just being a football player, that, like, raising his profile was going to help with whatever he wanted to do in terms of media opportunities while his career was going on or after his career. Like, there's some of it, too, that's just his personality. Sherm's combative, and Sherm believes that he performs his best when he's got someone he is grinding against. He's got someone he's identified as an enemy that he's really going at. Like, that's, whether it is artificial or created, like, I think that's part of him. But let's resume.
Somebody like you or bring it. And if you do one or the other, then I regard you as sincere rather than an act. Is he a legitimately talented football player? Absolutely. Probably the best cornerback in football. But is he a legitimate tough guy? No, he's a fraud as a tough guy.
Well, but how would you decide that he is a tough guy? Like, what would make you think that? Is it the pro wrestling style interview after the game?
No. This is what Warren Sapp, Hall of Famer, trash talker, tough guy, said. Listen, if you go into that NFC Championship game and you say, no love found, no love lost, no handshakes after the game, then don't immediately after you make the play of the game go running up to the guy you beat and stick your hand in there like you're a sportsman, pretending to be a sportsman just to diss them.
Here was the thing, though. That was right to his face, man. He makes the play to save the game. Like an incredible athletic play. And then he goes up and shows him up in front of everybody. And then he makes the choke sign at the 49ers bench, draws a flag. And afterwards, like when most people, it was just heat of the moment, he was like, were you making the choke sign at your college coach, Jim Harbaugh? And he's like, no, that was for Kaepernick.
Right.
Like, it was pretty, like, of all the different things, like, you can call it like, unsportsmanlike or kind of graceless. But, like, it was out there, and there was no sort of, 3 days later, he didn't apologize for it. He said it could have been done better.
But then this is where he lost.
So, yeah, I think my reaction holds up pretty well. Like, I don't think Sherman's a fake tough guy. Like, I think Sherman sat there. I don't think he tried to pretend that, like, I wasn't trying to bait Crabtree. Like, he's pretty open about, like, yeah, man, I was rubbing their noses in it. Like, I don't think that's fake tough guy behavior. And that seems like a weird we're having two writers debate about it. Also, I use the word like a lot. Listening back to it, I kind of cringe. Like, you can hear it. I use it a lot. I say like a lot.
And lost somebody like Warren Sapp is like, all right, so you're going to be a jerk to Michael Crabtree. And this is what Warren Sapp said. You're in a celebration with your teammates. They're like, hey, man, that's awesome. We're great. We're going to the Super Bowl. And you go, no. Before we do that, before we go celebrate, I got to go find Crabtree and tell him that up your nose with a rubber hose, and then
I'm not sure he was talking about his nose.
No, it wasn't his nose. It was basically like,
and then
come up against the best mediocre receiver.
Right.
It's awesome.
And then you back away from it, and on top of that, say it's the media's fault for portraying it the wrong way. That's when you're a phony in my eyes. Either you go after Crabtree and own it and say, yeah, I'm a bad dude, and I don't care what you think of me.
I'm going to trash talk you to your face.
I'm going to trash talk you to your face. But then you back up and say, and Sapp said, he wasn't backing up. He was backpedaling big time. If you change it about, it's the media who doesn't understand me and where I come from, and people on Twitter had to be racist because they didn't understand what a great guy I am. That's all hooey.
So it's funny to hear Kiszla's argument style, especially after we've just gone through his column, because he's clearly positioning it as like, I'm not the arbiter of toughness, Warren Sapp is. And I guess it's important to keep in mind, this is before Warren Sapp had, it's the following Super Bowl, I believe, when Warren Sapp had the issue with the ladies who argued that I think he had not paid them and kind of dropped off the face. At this point, Sapp is still, might even be working for the NFL Network at this point. But it's like, hey, I'm not saying this. This is Warren Sapp, arbiter of toughness, which is hilarious because like the one benefit you get as a columnist is you don't have to report your opinions. Like you can just say them. You can just say like, I don't think Richard Sherman is a tough guy because he backed away. And I think what he's saying is that Richard Sherman played the victim in the days following the NFC Championship game. That he talked about the nature of the criticism he received and what people said, which is kind of a different discussion, in my opinion. But I could, if his argument was like, hey, he should have stood by being sort of an arrogant and rubbing Crabtree's nose in it, and by him complaining about the nature of the reaction and pointing out that there might have been racial elements to it, that sort of undermines his tough guy credibility. It's probably a stronger argument. Maybe that's what he's saying.
It's just a bunch of hooey.
No, the people on Twitter might be racist by virtue of what they actually say, depending upon who the person is and what was in the...
Okay, I should clarify, and I don't think I said this before. Oren Lamina is black. So, and that's the voice you're hearing right now. Oren is the one that's kind of pointing out that some of the criticism that Sherman faced on Twitter may have been racist based on what they were saying. I'll back it up just a little bit.
That's all hooey. That's just a bunch of hooey.
No, the people on Twitter might be racist by virtue of what they actually say, depending upon who the person is and what was in the tweet.
I do think it's funny because Mark and I have crossed paths a couple times. I don't think he knows me at all. But I do remember his interview style in NBA locker rooms would be he would kind of sit on the floor. You would kind of cuddle up next to the guy. It was a very, very like down here to take the notes. And I think it's funny that now you've become the broker of toughness in terms of a 195-pound cornerback and whether or not he can actually back up what he says. Because of all the things you could say about Richard Sherman and criticize him for, I don't think it's for being phony. He is pretty genuinely who he is. And the past week, he's, in my mind, done a pretty good job of not apologizing for what he did, yet expressing regret for creating a situation that obscured the performance of his teammates.
I wish I would have leaned into what Oren was saying there, because I kind of yanked it back to my point. There's something. It would have been interesting to discuss that further, like at what point, sort of, the kickback to how Richard Sherman reacted sort of crossed a line, because that happened. It's not that Richard Sherman, in his reaction to the NFC Championship game and the LOB, that was going to make people mad. It was going to make San Francisco fans really mad, but there's an old school football element of it that's going to be like, hey, I don't like that. And like, I know that there were guys who were former Seahawks whose reaction was like, oh man, okay, now it's going to be about that. And felt that it got in the way of the sort of the team's victory, and that it was unnecessary. But there's also part of that reaction, or what I would consider the overreaction, that had racial elements to it. That wasn't about sportsmanship, and it wasn't about, and I think, and that's what Oren was getting at, is that there is part of the reaction to what Richard did that wasn't about the actual event so much as it was about a black man being very demonstrative in victory. So, kind of in retrospect, I wish I would have listened more there and kind of gone in that direction instead of yanking it back to my point of like, hey, Richard's actually stood by what he said, and you can't, of all the things you can call him, like fake tough guy isn't it.
He's a thug wannabe.
Oh, God, that's Kiszla. Oh, man. I forgot that. Are you serious?
The past week, he's, in my mind, done a pretty good job of not apologizing for what he did, yet expressing regret for creating a situation that obscured the performance of his teammates.
He's a thug wannabe. So either be a thug or don't.
Oh, be careful with that word, man.
No. It's his way of backpedaling it that thug means the N-word. No, it doesn't.
Oh, my God. I didn't remember that. I wonder if I let him get away with that.
And you can be a white thug, you can be a black thug, you can be a yellow thug, you can be a green thug.
What about that? What about that though?
Or you can be a Polish thug like myself.
Now, being an African American, the thug equals N-word.
It depends on what people put into it. I mean, you can call someone a thug without meaning it, but there's a lot of people that I hear will use that word, and I'm not saying Mark is right of saying like.
So what did he say? What did he say yesterday? Now the song I listened to get myself ready for the game is.
Okay, I want to listen to that again.
Because of all the things you could say about Richard Sherman and criticize him for, I don't think it's for being phony. He is pretty genuinely who he is. In the past week, he's, in my mind, done a pretty good job of not apologizing for what he did, yet expressing regret for creating a situation that obscured the performance of his teammates.
He's a thug wannabe. So either be a thug or don't.
Oh, be careful with that word, man.
No. It's his way of backpedaling it that thug means the N-word. No, it doesn't. And you can be a white thug, you can be a black thug, you can be a yellow thug, you can be a green thug.
What about that? What about that though?
Or you can be a Polish thug like myself.
Now, being an African American, the thug equals N-word.
It depends on what people put into it. I mean, you can call someone a thug without meaning it, but there's a lot of people that I hear will use that word, and I'm not saying Mark is right of saying like.
So what did he say? What did he say?
Okay. I wish I would have pushed back harder there. I think I started to. I gave him an out. I don't know if I listened to Oren enough. Man, I forgot. I didn't realize that had happened. So he said he's a wannabe thug. And then I said, be careful with that word. And then he said you can be a black thug, a white thug. And then there was a reference to it doesn't have anything, and that Richard is the one, because he said he's the one that's saying that thug equals the N-word. And then you hear Oren say, but there are people that when you hear them say thug, it does sort of serve as a substitute, a stand-in for the N-word. And then I said it depends on what you put into that. And that it doesn't necessarily mean, like that you can't just assume. I think that's my point. Yeah, you know what, man? Like, that's a bad job by me, because what I should have said is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? Put the onus on him. And let Oren talk about how he hears that. Like, I didn't leave space in the conversation for that. And then I gave him an out of saying, I'm not saying that's what Mark is saying. That's lame. I should have asked him. I should have asked him what he meant by that. Yeah, I should have. I should have asked that question and then shut up, because everything that I said didn't really add to that.
Yesterday. Now, the song I listened to get myself ready for the game is Act Right. So I'm not sure I went up and looked up the right Act Right, but I listened to Act Right about 3 times yesterday. It didn't use the word thug at all. It used the word a number of times.
Well, so, that's African American hip hop music, urban.
I said African American. Oh, that sounds corny as hell. It's African American music. It's rap music. It's hip hop. this is the part that I remember. So I remember it starting here. I'll remember this. I'll back up just a little bit and then we'll listen to it in its entirety. Because this part I remember.
It didn't use the word thug at all. It used the word a number of times.
Well,
so,
but that's African American hip hop music, urban music. I mean, there's no this should
no,
be
no,
a
it's
referendum on that of like
no, okay, no, but it's so it's okay if so you're saying it's okay if Richard uses the word, but it's wrong if anybody else uses.
I would
the word.
say this: white men have no business telling African American men whether or not that word is okay. That is a word that, in my mind, and this is just from me, white men should not have any jurisdiction over. They should never use it and should never govern how other people use it.
But then if
how
you
even communicate
no,
I don't know.
No.
So
You can hear Peter and Oren are trying to get this. They're like, dude, this has gone off the rails. Like you can hear. Like they're like, because Peter's like, how are we even going to communicate anymore? And Oren's like, I don't know. Like they're trying to lighten it because they know that this conversation has gotten into a bad spot where you got two white sports writers who are debating the morality of using the N-word in rap music. Yeah, man, he's totally wrong, and I think that summarizes how I still feel. Like I think that's about right. That I guess the one thing I would say is that white people don't have any business using that word, telling people of color how to use that word. But they do have a business. Like it is their responsibility to call other white people out, either when they use it or advocate for the sort of the right to use it, or say no one should be able to use it. Like I in general, like I think what I said still reflects how I feel, which is it's just a conversation that I don't feel my voice is necessary or applicable on outside of white dudes discussing the N-word. Like it's my opinion doesn't really matter on that stuff.
We're worlds apart.
Hey, all right.
And if you say that, then you're a weak white man.
Whoa, you are. Wait.
I have no jurisdiction.
What the hell just happened?
I have no jurisdiction.
Wait, what just
I don't even know if
happened?
I'm insulted.
What
I just
just happened?
called a weak white man. Is that
You
an
are.
insult?
You're just a weak man. If you're afraid of the word,
I'm a strong white man. Look at me.
Yeah.
Do I look weak to you? Am I weak? I might be weak.
In the
I
commercial
beat Brock
break,
Hewitt in bowling
in the
last
commercial
night,
break, we're going to have a best 3 out of 5 arm wrestling contest. That will be a web exclusive on the Denver Post.
I'm going to call my wife. She's going to be very disappointed.
It is going to be,
honey.
She knew she married a white man.
Honey.
She did not know she married
but
a
it's
weak
a
white
weak
man.
white man, dude. And you know what? I feel better.
I
that
do
we're-
not have white guilt because I know I treat people equally.
All right.
And so if you have guilt, that's your problem. It's not my problem.
I don't
and
have
if you
guilt,
have
man.
guilt and you say I have no jurisdiction about what's right and wrong,
That's not what I said.
And you cannot use a word as a weapon and on one side and not on the other. It's just the way it is.
You're speaking in very, very black and white and not meaning that in a racial way terms about something that is much more complicated than that. I have a very firm idea of right and wrong.
It's just plain wrong. If it's wrong for a white person to use the word, it's wrong for a black person to use the word.
Don't you think that this country's gotten into a lot of trouble by white people telling black people what they can and can't say?
We go to our black correspondent, Oren Lamina, to give us a breakdown of that.
As Pootie Tang would say, Saturday off the tippy tie.
Danny, we'll have you on. You know, it's funny because all week long I felt like we've all been so nice and cordial to each other.
Then we got weak white men.
Right.
I'm making fun of Kiszla's
You
interview style.
introduced this white man into it.
Let me make it clear. I'm not offended at all, and I think it's great to have these conversations.
It is. We're We're just nation building here. That's what we're
it's like the United Colors of Benetton over here.
Yeah, Jesse Jackson was down in the lobby the past couple of days. Yeah, we probably made up
a couple words while you was talking.
We did say that. I tell you what, Danny, appreciate the time.
Hey,
man.
I appreciate it.
I'm sure you got to have kids on there.
We'll be right here.
All right, take care, guys.
Zach Fogg back in the studio. We're going to go to break here just a couple of minutes early, as I believe Jake Plummer going to join us, former Broncos quarterback who is in town.
Wow. It's weird to listen back to that. Pretty early on. That's still my first year as a full-time radio host. There are definitely things that I wish I had done different. When I heard him say, when I said I wasn't offended, I don't care what he said about me, but I think there was more room. I think what he said is inappropriate. I think his perspective on, in general, his belief that you can draw a moral right and wrong over the use of the N-word by people who aren't white. I think that's wrong. I think that was a solid line that I had about this country's gotten into enough trouble by white men telling black men what they can and can't say. The other thing that strikes to me, though, is that you've got two white dudes in myself and Kiszla, and the segment is structured for it to be kind of a debate between the two of us. But there was another voice that could have been much more useful and informative and important there in Oren. And I don't want to say that but I think I sucked air out of the room. I think that's definitely true. I didn't create space or hold space for anyone else. I was there to make my point, and I don't think my point or my perspective on that issue is the most important. I think I had a point to make to Kiszla, which is that we as white dudes should stay out of that discussion. That's something. It's interesting. I feel a little bit this way about the current discussion about Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State and going to Colorado, in that the discussion, and Bomani Jones has done an exceptional job of talking about the room to criticize him for the way he went to Jackson State and then the way he left Jackson State, and kind of the dream that he sold to Jackson State when it was always about self-interest for Deion. But there's also a part of me that's that's not my perspective on that. I don't really have a foundation. I didn't go to an HBCU. I know about HBCUs, but not in terms of life experience. So that my perspective on what it means for him to leave an HBCU, really, it doesn't matter. In the overall scheme of things, you're better off getting someone else for whom that experience, who has that experience, who has that background, who has that understanding, than hearing my opinion of oh, this seems to me like what you have when a coach leaves a smaller program for a bigger program. And we shouldn't be any more mad at Deion for doing that than we are for, say, the job path that Kalen DeBoer has taken, going from an NAIA school and then moving his way up and then going and becoming an assistant coach. And then that's not the proper framework. So I wish in listening back to that, I wish I'd cleared more space for Oren to talk if he wanted to. And not to say, because then there's the tricky thing of he's also not obligated to inform or to insert himself into that conversation, because you could tell both he and Peter were dude, this went somewhere where we did not expect it to go. I'd give my performance there, I think it'd be a solid B. I get knocked down for using the term African American music and urban music. That's corny as hell. I also, by saying I'm not saying what Mark means by the word thug. I gave him an out that was unnecessary. And then I failed to ask him, what do you mean by that? I think the most of the rest of it kind of holds up. I'd be interested. If you got any opinions, you can leave a comment for the podcast. That is going to do it for this episode of the Dang Apostrophe. I appreciate you listening. I don't believe we'll have any Turn Back the Clock broadcast reviews going forward. And I've got something to say about the Seattle Seahawks and what they should do at quarterback, but I'm going to wait one more week before I do that. If you have a chance or are interested, please feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. It is the Dang Apostrophe. You can find it on Substack, via my Twitter, or just search Google Danny O'Neill, the Dang Apostrophe.